when I told you there was going to be a Sylvanus guide like a month ago? Yeah, here it is. Welcome back everybody to another episode of Know Your Enemy. My name is Trendkill and I apologize for the delay on this video. Christmas happened, then New Year's happened, and then I had to make a special episode for the Smite World Championships. I came back, regrouped, and finally I'm getting around to making this video. So I'm not going to waste any more of your time on this intro. We're going to go ahead and get into the guide. Today we're going to be talking about Sylvanus, the Keeper of the Wilds. So first off, let's take a look at Sylvanus's graph. Now at a first glance, you're going to see that the top of the graph is empty, the bottom of the graph is completely full. Sylvanus is the quintessential guardian. He's got utility, defense, control, and on top of all of that, he can heal you. Now, he doesn't have a lot of damage because a lot of his damage isn't bursty. It's very slow and constant damage, and his mobility is essentially nothing. If he was lower on the graph, he would not be able to move. He is one of the least mobile gods in the game. Now, I do want to touch on one thing real quick before we move on to his abilities. Even though Sylvanus' damage is low, a lot of his damage is constant annoying poke damage that can add up. So you do want to be careful pressing a Sylvanus too hard early game, especially when he's behind his minions and he's healing the damage that you're doing. So why so bottom heavy on this graph? Let's move into his abilities and see exactly why he's so high in control, healing, defense, and utility. First off, let's talk about his passive Nature's Protection. This does not affect Sylvanus himself in any way. This affects the person who's attacking him. Anybody who attacks him has a 1 in 4 chance to be rooted in place for 1 second. Now, the drawback to that is that can only happen every 12 seconds. So once it happens, it can't happen again for another 12 seconds. A good Sylvanus will be paying attention to his passive, waiting for that to proc, and then hitting you with his other abilities. So while it doesn't seem all that scary, be careful because that could lead into a chain of other crowd control, and we'll talk more about that in the mechanics section. Now, his first ability, Verdant Growth, is a very interesting ability. It's got 2 uses. One, he can throw it at an enemy, and that enemy will take damage and be rooted for 1.25 seconds. If he happens to miss that ability, or he chooses an empty spot on the ground to cast Verdant Growth, it will plant a pod on the ground. After 10 seconds, that pod will blossom into a flower, and then in a large AoE around that flower will grant him and his allies MP5. Now, he can have 3 of those pods on the ground at any given time, and those pods can all be destroyed by a single auto attack. Now, when an enemy destroys the pod, they will get their magical and their physical protections reduced by up to 20. So while his pods can be destroyed, at least he and his team get some sort of benefit for them being removed. His second ability is called Wisps, and this is where Sylvanus gets his healing. Wisp is an AoE heal over time around Sylvanus that heals himself and all allies in that area, including minions. Now, on top of that, all allies hit also gain a protections buff for 5 seconds, and any enemies caught, including enemy minions, take a damage over time for 5 seconds. So you can already see in 2 abilities, he's got a ton of utility on the board already. Now, to add to his control a little bit, let's take a look at his third ability, Nature's Grasp. Now, this is a very straightforward ability, and currently, this ability type is unique to Sylvanus. This is a straight shot, kind of slow-moving projectile that grabs the first god it hits and pulls them right in front of Sylvanus. Once they land in front of Sylvanus, they are then stunned for 1 second. A little tidbit of information for any new players, this used to be Arachne's ultimate. For those of you who don't know who Arachne is, she is the spider type god, and her ultimate used to be to shoot out a web and pull an enemy to her. When Arachne was redesigned, she lost that ultimate and it was given to Sylvanus as a normal ability. And his ultimate, Wrath of Terra, this is another reason that Sylvanus does not have a ton of damage on his graph. It is not a burst damage type ability. It is a large AoE knockup that then poisons anybody hit, and that poison does a damage over time for 5 seconds. So again, his ultimate, his wisps, his auto attacks, they're all slow, annoying damage that will add up over time, so you have to be careful squaring off against a Sylvanus and his lane mate if you don't have some sustain of your own. So anyway, now that we know all of his abilities, we know what he looks like on the graph, let's take all of this information, piece it together, and see what that's going to look like on the battlefield. Okay, so tips for Sylvanus. This is going to be a very quick fire section because in its basic form, Sylvanus' kit is very obvious. For the most part, he's going to CC chain you, dot you, and smack you with auto attacks as you try to get away from him. So first off, let's talk about some general tips. Sylvanus is a setup god. He requires teamwork to be utilized properly. What I mean by that is he's not like an Amir who's gonna freeze you, smack you with Glacial Strike, throw up a wall, and then use his ultimate to burn you down. Sylvanus, again, is slow, constant damage, but he's got a lot of annoying crowd control. So obviously, Sylvanus is his best in the duo lane with his laning partner, or in a team fight, or rotating for a gank. And on top of that, he's going to be infinitely better if he's got someone he's communicating with for those ganks, or for those kills. Now, while we're on this topic, let's go ahead and talk about another tip. Make sure you watch out for kill lanes. Now, what I mean by this is you're going to want to watch out for Sylvanus laning with someone like Neith or Artemis or Anhur, who can really take advantage of all the crowd control that he brings. Understand that Sylvanus can already root you, then pull you to him, then knock you up in the air with his ultimate. If you couple those CCs with someone like Artemis, who can then lay a trap at your feet to catch you there for even longer, then hit you with Tusky from her ultimate, you can really be shut down quick. Anhur can continue the CC chain by throwing up a pillar behind you and impaling you to it. Neith can then root you after all of that, and if you still get away, she can kill you with the ultimate. So you really want to be careful for Sylvanus not killing you, but setting you up for someone else to kill you. Now, in addition to all of that, also be very wary of being pulled into the tower. If you're pulled into the tower, you can then be rooted in the tower, you can then be knocked up in the tower, and if you're not dead by that time, somebody like Neith can root you even longer in the tower, so you've got to be very careful around tower range against a Sylvanus. Now, the good news is, because of his low mobility, if Sylvanus is out of position, early on, you're likely to be able to take him down with little to no problem. So gods like Hercules or Sobek can directly counter him because they can put him so far out of position that he can't do much after that. This is a really great way to shut Sylvanus down so that he falls further behind and is easier to kill for longer. Now, if you don't have somebody that can pull him out of position, understand that he's got a very strong early game simply because he can heal his allies and damage yours all in one ability. Now, not to mention, on top of that, he also gives his allies a protections buff. So not only are his allies healing the damage you're doing to them, but they're also gaining protections for future damage that you're going to do. This gives Sylvanus an extremely good early game push and also a ton of high sustain, meaning that he can stay in lane longer. Couple that with the fact that he's really the only tank that can help sustain his laning partner as well, and that makes for a very, very strong early game. Now let's take a minute to talk about Nature's Grasp. This is his pull ability, and I told you that this is unique to Sylvanus. There are other gods in the game that have a mechanic that pulls you towards them. However, Nature's Grasp is the only pull in the game that can be fired through a wall, grab somebody, and pull them back through that wall. Now, this allows for some really tricky ganks. If Sylvanus can pull you through a wall and isolate you from the rest of the team, if he's got help there and you don't have a jump or an escape to get away from him, odds are you're probably gonna die. Now, this is obviously one of his big forms of crowd control, so let's go ahead and talk about his combo chain. Essentially, Verdant Growth, Nature's Grasp, and Wrath of Terra can all be used in any order to hold you in place for an extremely long amount of time. He can use Verdant Growth to root you, which makes his Nature's Grasp easy to hit, and then Wrath of Terra you once you get pulled to him. If he's already in close range, he can start the chain with his ultimate, then pull you to continue that CC, and then use Verdant Growth to root you at his feet after the stun wears off. Or he can pull you through a wall, then smack you with Verdant Growth so you can't move, and then ult you afterwards. You obviously get the point. He can do this in any order. So a very important item to have when you're playing against a Sylvanus is Purification Beads. Now, you're going to hear me talk about Purification Beads in a lot of these videos because it's such an important item to play against gods who have a high level of control. And last but not least, let's talk about a couple generic tips that really I couldn't find a place for. Since we're already talking about his combo chain, let's go ahead and discuss his auto attacks and Verdant Growth. Now, his auto attacks are ranged, and they do an AoE damage where they land. Now, when he casts Verdant Growth, all that does is modifies his auto attacks to create that pod when they land, or to root you if it hits you. The beautiful thing about playing against a Sylvanus is that his auto attacks cannot be thrown over walls. Now, because Verdant Growth modifies his auto attacks, Verdant Growth can also not be thrown over walls. So from the Sylvanus' point of view, it can be very frustrating trying to chase somebody through the jungle if they're hugging a wall, because it's very hard to hit them with your auto attacks and your Verdant Growth. So if you happen to be low on life and running from Sylvanus, my suggestion to you would be to hug the wall so that it's much harder for him to hit those two attacks. And finally, Sylvanus has one of the largest teamfight presences in the game. In a team fight, if people happen to be attacking him, his passive's gonna proc rooting one, he can root another one with Verdant Growth, he's constantly healing his team and damaging the enemy team, he can pull somebody back into the fight, he can Wrath of Terra for a massive AoE knockup and poison to everybody that it hits, and on top of all that, his Wisps are not only going to give his team life back and damage you, but they're also gonna make his team take less damage in general. so you can see how he can be an absolute monster in a team fight. So be very careful going up against a Sylvanus and his team if he's got his full kit available. So anyway, guys, there you have it. I'm gonna leave you with this. I really hoped this video would allow you to branch out from your current god pool. Ugh. Anyway, guys, I'm gonna get out of here. Again, my name is Trinkill. Thanks for stopping by and hanging out with me, and come check me out next week when we're gonna be talking about Nemesis, the goddess of vengeance.